body replaces roughly 1% of its total mass. That means hundreds of billions of dead cells are shed and seamlessly replaced with entirely new ones to keep your tissues intact. We can easily observe how animals manage this sort of dynamic tissue repair. But consider a tree. It can stand hundreds of feet tall and remain completely rigid against violent winds, despite lacking a single bone in its structure. The macroscopic feats we see in nature, whether it's human healing or a towering oak, rely entirely on the invisible, automated labor of microscopic engines working in unison. This visual represents the biological limit of our eyes. For most of human history, the mechanics of these microscopic engines were completely inaccessible to us. We cannot distinguish two objects if they are closer than 0.1 millimeters apart. Below that scale, distinct shapes merge into a single point. This physical barrier held until 1665, when an English scientist named Robert Hooke built his own compound microscope, magnifying objects up to 300 times their natural size. Looking at this historical illustration of Hooke's observations, you can see thin slices of corkwood. Under magnification, he noticed the plant material was divided into tiny, box-like compartments. He named them cells. This observation laid the groundwork for cell theory, the realization that absolutely every living organism on Earth is constructed from these individual, self-contained units. The cell is the strict biological baseline of existence. If a structure is alive, it is made of cells. If it is not made of cells, it is not biologically alive. To exist at all, a living system must separate itself from the chemical chaos of the outside world. Order requires a strict physical boundary. Every living cell uses a cell membrane to achieve this. It acts as a selectively permeable filter, allowing specific nutrients in while keeping toxic elements out. But this thin membrane presents a structural problem for plants. Animals can move away from harsh weather or predators, but a stationary plant has to withstand those environmental stresses directly. This diagram illustrates how plants solve that problem. Surrounding the delicate internal membrane is an additional, highly rigid layer called the cell wall, built primarily from tough cellulose fibers. Establishing this physical barrier allowed fragile chemical reactions to stabilize and operate safely inside a durable shell. Once a cell secures its borders, it faces an information problem. A microscopic pocket of fluid needs exact instructions on what proteins to build and how to process energy. This diagram compares the two main cellular strategies. Early organisms, known as prokaryotes, let their genetic material float freely in the cellular fluid. But more complex cells, eukaryotes, developed a distinct double-layered vault to lock these instructions away. We call this the nucleus. Inside that vault lies DNA. This molecule functions as the strict instruction manual, containing the specific code required to build and operate every part of the cell. To prove how absolute this code is, researchers once hollowed out a bacterium, leaving the membrane intact, and inserted entirely synthetic DNA. The cell immediately began growing and dividing according to the new artificial instructions. The physical hardware of the cell is completely subservient to the software code written in its nucleus. Executing those instructions requires heavy industrial work. The fluid interior of the cell, the cytoplasm, is packed with specialized machinery that constantly generates dangerous metabolic waste. To prevent internal toxicity, cells deploy lysosomes. These are single membrane sacs filled with potent enzymes that act as a microscopic cleanup crew, engulfing and breaking down damaged proteins and unwanted fats. Looking back at our plant cell diagram, you'll see a massive light blue structure dominating the center. This is the central vacuole. It acts like an internal water tower, storing fluids to maintain the high pressure necessary to keep the rigid cell wall upright. Without these specific logistical systems, a cell would either drown in its own toxic byproducts or physically collapse under its own weight. Even with perfect waste management and structural integrity, every cell faces an inevitable physical limit. They wear out, and they eventually die. This microscope slide captures the solution in real time, a process called mitosis. The cell duplicates its DNA vault and systematically splits its cytoplasm to produce two genetically identical daughter cells. Because of this highly regulated duplication, a single fertilized egg can scale mathematically, dividing into 2, then 4, then 8, until it constructs a complex body consisting of trillions of individual cells. Cellular division provides the exact mechanism that guarantees a species can outlast the lifespan of any single biological component. A single cell replicating successfully is a biological victory. But in a complex organism, aggressive replication without strict coordination is fatal. This schematic demonstrates how animal cells use a vital braking system called contact inhibition. They actively monitor their surroundings and halt their division cycle the exact moment they physically touch their neighbors. When a cell suffers a mutation that disables this specific communication system, it begins dividing uncontrollably, forming a tumor. This structural failure is what we recognize as cancer. Cells also possess built-in self-destruction protocols to maintain architectural order. This is known as programmed cell death, or PCD. In early human embryo development, the hands form as solid blocks of tissue. Programmed cell death precisely dissolves the cells between the digits, sculpting distinct functional fingers out of webbed appendages. The architecture of a complex organism relies entirely on this balance. A cell's ability to selectively die on command is just as critical as its ability to replicate. It is easy to look in a mirror and see a single, continuous individual, but beneath the limit of our vision, you are built from discrete, active units. They are not passive bricks. They are complex engines that constantly process energy, manage toxic waste, and interpret genetic software. You are a perfectly coordinated collective, trillions of these microscopic factories communicating and dividing in the dark, working in total unison to maintain the biological illusion of you.